We're going to jump right into the Word today. But before I jump into the Word, I'd like to ask a question. Now, even if you're not someone that drives, you might have been in a car. You have been in a car. Whether you're a little kid or you're a grown adult, whoever you may be, we often like car rides without traffic. They're much more pleasant. You get to where your destination is quicker. And a lot of times, I know that for me, I'm a fast driver. I'm sure most of you that have been in my car with me know that by now. And I'd like to drive really, really fast. And so I love roads without traffic, straight roads. But whenever I'm driving straight, sometimes on a highway, I can pass a few exits very quickly. And sometimes it often happens that there's one exit that's just jammed. And because that one exit is jammed, though I've been traveling really fast for a while, I have to slam on my brakes because there's a roadblock. And in life, sometimes that happens. You might be running so fast and things might be moving at such a fast pace, but sometimes there's roadblocks. And when there's roadblocks, you get slowed down. And sometimes we don't enjoy being slowed down because we're so focused on heading somewhere that we don't like any delays. We're known as the microwave generation. We don't like when things take long. I know that for myself, I realize that sometimes when we'll put something in the microwave, I won't wait till it hits 0 or starts beeping. I usually stop it before it even gets to 1 because I like to take it out before. We need things very quickly. We need instant messaging. When you text someone, you expect that they would reply right away. And you're probably sometimes, if it's something that's really important to you, you're waiting for that text. We want constantly something that is happening right away. But sometimes in life, we encounter these roadblocks. And today, the title of my message is Encounters with Jesus. Sometimes Jesus finds us at the most unlikely places, and we find ourselves having encounters with Jesus. And today, I want to share with you about a woman who encountered Jesus in probably, you would say, an unlikely place, maybe a place where she didn't really want to meet Jesus. She wasn't expecting to meet Jesus, but it was at this place that she bumps into Jesus. Let's turn our Bible to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. So if I give you a brief recap of how we end up where we are in this story today, Jesus was going around preaching and teaching to all the people around, and he was doing miracles and wonders, and he was not only doing healings, he was healing people, things that people had never seen before in that place or that region, and he was speaking wisdom from God. He was giving revelation to so many people, and there were a lot of people that were being attracted to him. And when all these people were being attracted to him, they started following him. And so Jesus had, I think, the most amount of followers. On social media, people keep a lot of track even today on how many followers we have and who's following and who's not following. Jesus had so many followers just because of who he was. He didn't have to go around and tell people to follow him. Jesus just was who he was. And because of who he was, people started being attracted to him. And Jesus, when he was doing his ministry and healing people and going around, there comes a time when he heals the centurion's servant. The centurion's servant, in chapter 7, it begins with the story of the centurion's servant that was sick, and he was healed. Jesus just sends a word and is healed. And this passage of this encounter of Jesus with this woman happens right after the healing of the centurion's servant. If you read chapter 7, we'll read from verse 11. It says, "Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother. She was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. So we find ourselves in the middle of this story where the large crowd was following Jesus, and they were all talking about how great Jesus was and all the miracles that Jesus did. In that crowd, there might have been people that had been healed. Maybe they had suffered for their whole life and they were healed. Maybe people that even, it says that he was casting out demons, people that had been suffering, that had been in bondage for years, that they had been set free. This crowd was made up of many people. And even this crowd was made up of people that just heard about Jesus. They just heard that this man is amazing. He's teaching things that we've never heard before. He's performing signs and miracles. And so there was this large crowd following Jesus. And right after this, it says that when Jesus was going, he enters a city of Nain. And he says that when he's going there, his disciples were with him and the crowd was with him. I like that there was a distinction between disciples. It says many disciples. So it wasn't just talking about the ones that Jesus had chosen. So it was talking about many disciples followed him and the crowd. There will always be a distinction between a crowd and disciples. And he says here that there was a crowd that was coming with Jesus, all people talking about how great Jesus was. They might not know who Jesus was exactly. They were all just following around, going with the flow. And as they were going, they encounter the first person person that in this scripture that we are encountering is, or introduced to, is the dead man. It says, and when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out. So the first thing that's mentioned here is painting a story for us when Luke writes this, that there was a dead man coming. So that was the first thing that they perceived when they were coming to the gate. Now, it's an interesting thing where this happens. It happens where? At the gate. And I shared some time ago about the gates and how we have many gates. Gates were places, even in old cities in ancient times, that cities were protected by walls and they had gates. And there were people who sat at the gate, people in leadership, people with authority, who allowed people to come in and people to go out. It was like the security of the city. And there, it was at the gate, it says, that when Jesus was about to go to the city, he wanted to enter the city, that outside, coming out of the city, was this other crowd. And preceding this other crowd was a dead man. And I'll tell you that probably when this crowd was coming, Jesus' crowd was probably coming from this side. And as they were coming, they were all talking and they were all maybe sharing even testimonies about what Jesus did. So many people coming, and they see this funeral coming. And I would think that as they saw this funeral coming, they saw the dead body coming, they probably stopped talking about Jesus. Sometimes that happens in our lives when we encounter people and things that, when situations come. There was this crowd that encountered another crowd and they saw something that was dead and they just stopped talking about Jesus. I would think that they probably all got really quiet and their intention was to wait until the funeral had passed. Even in our country, when we have funeral processions that are going on throughout, even in the roads, you would see people will often allow the procession to go ahead. They might move over to the side, even if you're driving on the highway. I've seen that everyone out of respect will move over and allow them to proceed. And I would think that at this time also, this crowd, as they were approaching and the other crowd was approaching, they got all really quiet. There was a dead man approaching, and it says right after that there was a dead man being carried out, and it says, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. So after the dead man comes his mother. And after his mother comes another crowd. The first thing we see here, that there's two types of crowds. There's the crowd that was with Jesus. The crowd that was talking about Jesus was influenced by Jesus. And then there was another crowd that was coming behind this widow mother that probably was influenced by her or knew her. And they were also coming, but this crowd was different than Jesus's crowd. This crowd was mourning. And there comes a point when they both meet. Sometimes in life we go through situations where we have these roadblocks that slow us down, in situations where we don't know if there's any hope. We might have even lost hope in those places or situations. And here Jesus encounters this woman. And it doesn't tell us a lot about this woman except the fact that she had lost her only son. She was a widow. Now, in those days, that was a really big deal. They lived in a patriarchal society, and for a woman, her man used to care for her, the house, run the home, and bring in the food. And if her husband was not there, she was a widow. Her dependence was on her son. And it says that he was her only son. So for this lady, it was not just that she had lost her son. She was actually crying because she was so broken because she lost all her hope. She had lost all of the hope that she had for her life. And she knew that for the rest of her life, because now she could no longer depend on her son, that she had to depend on the community around her. Because according to Jewish law, even offerings were taken for the widow and the poor. And for those people that were left alone, that didn't have support. So the community took care of such people. But even that, widows and the poor were put into one category. She knew that she couldn't depend on her son, and now that maybe for what she needed or how she needed to live, she might be depending on other people. She was so broken because she lost all the hope of what she could have had in her life. Sometimes the enemy comes at us and he destroys our situations in our life, and he presents us with discouragement. And here I would imagine that she was so discouraged that she didn't even have any hope of what was coming next. She wasn't even looking forward to tomorrow because she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. And here at this point, Jesus meets this woman. And after that, what does it say? In verse 13, it says, when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. But if you think about it, the emotional turmoil that this woman was going through, she had just lost hope of everything, all her hopes and dreams of her life for her son, her family. She was left all alone. And at this time, Jesus comes to her. It says that he had compassion on her. But even though Jesus had compassion on her, he said, do not weep. If I translated that in our language, Jesus said, stop crying. How insensitive of Jesus. This mother was mourning for her child. She was devastated, broken, and Jesus goes to her and he says, stop crying. Now, I don't know if this woman had ever met Jesus before, but that was her first impression. How many of you know that first impressions are really important? Sometimes when we meet people, when we encounter people, our first impression is something that is very strong, that probably you might remember years later on, your first impression. And here, her first impression of Jesus is what he says to her. He says, stop crying. And I would imagine that she probably thought, what? Stop crying? And he tells her, stop crying. And after he says, stop crying, what does he say to her? The next thing he says, in verse 14, it says, then he came and touched the open coffin. Those who carried him stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. Now, the first crazy thing that Jesus did is he went to this mourning mother and he told her to stop crying. And the second thing that Jesus did that would absolutely been crazy at that time is that he went and he touched the dead body. It says that he touched him. And it says that he touched the dead body, and according to Jewish law, he was unclean. You are not supposed to touch the dead body. And here what Jesus does is he touches him and he says, get up. And I'm probably thinking that this mother is thinking, what just happened? She was prepared for a funeral. She was mourning. She was ready. This was not something that she was expecting to happen. But can I tell you, when I put myself in the place of this woman, I think that she probably just looked at her reality. She looked at the facts. My son is not here. There's nothing that I can do. And I'll tell you that the world will always give you facts. Will always present you with certain things that are facts. Sometimes there are facts that you're in student loan debt. That's a fact. There will be other facts that the world will present you, even in sickness, when people go through the doctor's reports and say, this is a fact, your sickness is not curable, or this is the fact that you are going through these things. Those are facts. The world will always present you with facts, and for this lady, the fact was that her son was dead. They were carrying her coffin. That was just a fact that the world presented. But can I tell you that when you encounter Jesus, Jesus does not present facts to you. He presents the truth. And Jesus here at this time presents the truth. If you turn to 1 John chapter 14, John chapter 1, verse 14. John chapter 1, verse 14. It says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, and glory as of the only begotten Son of the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus is full of grace and truth. This is one thing that we must always remember in every situation, that Jesus was the Word that became flesh, the only begotten Son of the Father, and that he is grace and truth. When you come into contact with Jesus, when you encounter Jesus in your life in every situation, Jesus will not present facts to you, because you know what? Facts change. Because a few years ago, the fact was that Pluto was also a planet. But it changed. See, the world is ever changing, and so the world, when it presents facts to you, they change. The doctor's reports that are here today, tomorrow, they can change. There are a lot of things that are always changing. Jesus does not present facts and the reality of what you are seeing today, because Jesus does not operate in what you see and how we feel. He operates in the truth of the Word and who he is. And I'll tell you why that's so important. You know, I was thinking about this, and sometimes we say that we have to think out of the box. I'm sure you've heard of that term, think out of the box. When we had to come up with ideas at school, our teacher used to say, "I need you to think out of the box." And at that time, I didn't really understand what it meant in that perspective, but I just thought, okay, that means we should think something different. But what facts do is that this is the fact that you are no longer able to control the situation. You cannot do anything else about this, and that's about it. So what facts do is they put you in a box. And when you look at your reality and you see things around you, well, that's what I see. I don't see that there's any other hope around this. There's no other way for me to go around this situation. I'm in debt, and I can't afford with the job that I have to pay off these things. I cannot move forward with this. This doctor said that this is what it is, and there's nothing that we can do about it. See, the enemy will always put you in a box. And when you get yourself in a box, you know what the box does? It limits you. And you will be limited by all the things that you see around you. And if you will constantly believe in what the world presents to you, you will never be able to know the truth. Because Jesus is the truth. And you know what Jesus does? He sets you free. What Jesus does is, when you have an encounter with Jesus, and when you encounter his grace and his truth, what he actually does is he says, I need you to get out of the box. This is not where you are limited to. If you are going to do this thing called life with me, if you're going to walk through life with me, then that means that you are not going to have any limitations. That means that what you see is not actually what is the truth. What the truth is what I say you are, who you are in me. But a lot of times we look in the wrong places. And here this woman, she doesn't probably understand what's going on. And she was believing in the fact and going with the mindset that she was going to bury her son. And in this moment, when she encounters the grace of Jesus, it says Jesus had compassion on her. That was the grace of Jesus, that he just engulfed her with his love, that even though she didn't know who he was, even though she probably never had even spoke to him or seen him before that, Jesus knew who she was. Did you know that there was an entire crowd, and it talks about crowds before and crowds after, that the woman was also in a crowd? But of all the things, when Jesus sees the crowd, he sees people, individual people. He didn't see just a crowd. He didn't just see another funeral. He saw a weeping, broken mother that had lost all hope, who was depending on people to survive. She was depending on her son, and now she didn't have anyone else to depend on. And it's in that place that Jesus steps in and he says that you don't need to depend on people. You can depend on me. And Jesus tells her son to rise up. And in verse 15 it says, So he who was dead sat up, and began to speak. This verse actually really stuck out to me because in the previous verse it says that when Jesus encountered the man, he spoke to the man. Situation might look dead. Your situation, whatever you may be, would be dead. But it says that he went there and he spoke to the dead body. He spoke to the young man, it says, to get up. And when he spoke to the man did not only get up, it says that he got up and he spoke. Can I tell you that every situation responds to Jesus? There is nothing that is without hope. There is nothing that you can never go too far in any situation where Jesus is not able to bring back life in that place. Jesus, when he speaks, the heavens, the universe, everything responds. And this is so amazing about our God because when God was creating even the heavens and the earth, he spoke it into existence. He spoke and everything that was matter and space and time responded. And here, Jesus speaks. You might say, well, that sounds really lovely. Jesus did all those things. Jesus spoke to dead people. He spoke to dead situations. He healed people that had been sick for so long. But that was Jesus. But can I tell you that the Bible tells us that the same Spirit that raised him from the dead is the Spirit that you and I have been given. That once we were baptized, that we died to our old life, we received new life in Jesus. That means we received his grace and his truth. And because we received his grace and his truth, now we have also received his Spirit. And that means that you and I can speak life into every situation. But if we sit in our boxes with our facts, our bills, our papers, everything that we see, we might just be sitting there in mourning. Think that if this woman did not encounter Jesus on that day and he didn't just, sometimes we think it just happened. Jesus happened to walk by. Jesus never happens to walk by. Jesus is always there at the right time, at the right place. And Jesus will find you no matter wherever you may be. He can find you. And he found this woman at this place. Sometimes we like to mourn. We throw pity fests. We'll pity ourselves and our situation. We might be sad about the things that we have gone through. And the Bible tells us there is a time for crying, for laughing, a mourning, and for rejoicing. There are all times for things. But there is also something that we should know. As a born-again believer, it is always a time to stop mourning and move forward. And here the Lord does this amazing thing and he says, don't cry. Stop mourning. Stop crying. Speak. And he spoke. And when he speaks, everything in this universe responds. That's the God I serve. That's the Jesus that I love. And when I think about that, all the limitations that I see around me, all the obstacles and the struggles, it's just like they just fade away. Because I'm not doing this with my limitations in my box. I'm doing with this with Jesus without any limitations. And I don't know where you might be in your life today, going through your own struggles or your own places where you might find that you don't have any hope in a situation. It might be your relationships, maybe your finances, maybe even for some people in the place that you've been put in, your families, your workplace, wherever it may be. Sometimes there are things that we find that's just how it is. But I'll tell you that you can change everything around you by the words you speak. You can either speak life into your situation or you can sit there and cry. I don't know about you, but I don't want to sit in one place bound by limitations. I want to be free in Jesus and do amazing things for Jesus. And as we continue to read the last 2 verses of this portion, it says in verse 16, then the fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up amongst us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him went throughout all Judea and the surrounding regions. I love that it says fear came upon who? All the people. When did we start off? We started off with two types of people. We started off with the crowd that was praising Jesus and the wonderful things that Jesus was doing, the crowd that was following Jesus. But then we also saw that there was another crowd that was mourning. And both of these crowds, when they came together, when Jesus was there, what did Jesus do? He brought them all together. They were now no longer doing their own things. They were now, though that they were off to do different things. These people wanted to follow Jesus, and those were headed towards with the mindset they were going for a funeral. But wherever Jesus shows up, the wonderful thing about Jesus is that he will bring people together. And even here you see that after Jesus was done with this and he raised the man and presented him to his mother, that fear came upon all. And they glorified God. Everyone started glorifying God. Not just the happy people, not the people that had experienced deliverance, but even the people that witnessed the miracles that Jesus did, that Jesus had even overcome death. That who is this man that can even bring the dead back to life? There is nothing too hard for Jesus. And I want to share that with you, leaving you with that thought. That is there something that you in your life that you have limited yourself to, saying that this is something that I cannot do. This is something that the Lord cannot do in me or through me. Because I think that we've all been put into a box at some point of our life. But when you come out of that box and you say, Jesus, I'm going to do this walk with you. I'm not going to be in my box. I'll tell you that there will be amazing things that begin to happen. And even all the people around in your life and the places that you are and the people you're connected to, everybody, though they might have just been a crowd, will begin to glorify Jesus. At the end of the day, Jesus will always be glorified. But that means that also we have to be willing to give in to him. This woman was helpless and she just sat there. But you know what? When Jesus presented her son to him, I don't think that even she was depending on her son anymore. Her son was there back. I'm sure she was rejoicing on that. But Jesus proved something else to this woman. Not just that I can bring back your son, that I have overcome death. But Jesus also was proving to her that you can depend on me. Can you depend on Jesus? Sometimes we look for people we can depend on, but can you depend on Jesus? He is all that we need. Amen?